11 most incredible alternative weapons. Whips. Whips have been used by humans for quite some time. There are many different types of whips and they have thousands of different uses. Today they are mostly used in animal training, which isn't that nice. Whips in general aren't really used for much else now because they have some pretty bad stigmas attached to them. They're also pretty hard to get a hold of. When training with a whip, you will definitely accidentally whip yourself more than not. They also aren't the most practical weapons because they are used to inflict pain rather than do an actual damage. You have to really want to get good at this to endure the pain that comes with training. Our favorite example of whips being used as weapons are Indiana Jones and more recently Ghost Rider. Number 10. Warhammer. These deadly weapons are most common during the Middle Ages because traditional warhammers had two sides, one that was a sharp spike and another that was blunt. The blunt side that fills the most people think of when they think of a hammer was useful when you wanted to dent or cave in an opponent's armor, and spike side penetrated the armor without any problems. In an era where armor was common and swords were most ineffective at damaging the armor, warhammers were popular amongst a lot of warriors. Considering that the hammers are usually very heavy, not everyone could wield one of these items. They were most common amongst the Vikings though. Our favorite example of warhammers are the Elder Scrolls series and King Robert's warhammer in Songs of Ice and Fire. Number 9. Chakrams. This weapon has its roots in Indian culture. The earliest reference to this weapon is when it is used by the god Vishu in the epics Mahabharata and the Ramayana. The weapon was even carried into surrounding Asian countries including Tibet, Malaysia and Indonesia. The weapon was convenient because depending on their size, they could be stored in various areas of the body including wrist and neck. Hard to wield and dangerous in the right hands, this weapon looks cool and elegant. Our favorite examples is Zena from Zena the Warrior Princess. She often used these weapons on the show and they were revived through her. Number 8. Meteor Hammer. This ancient Chinese weapon falls into the flail and chained weapon class of weapons. The basic meteor hammer consists of two chained weights connected by a rope or chain. This deadly ancient weapon also goes by the names of Flying Hammer, Dragon's Fist, and Dai Chu. This weapon is set apart because its easy concealment and speed. Swinging the hammer around you and then letting it go at your opponents delivers a hard blow to any opponent. Because of the unpredictability of the strikes, it is also made it a hard weapon to defend against. When it is wielded by a seasoned user, this weapon was fully capable of striking and ensnaring or strangling an opponent from a distance. Our favorite example of this weapon is when a modernized version is used by Gogo Yubari in Kill Bill Volume 1. Number 7. Shotel. The Shotel originated in Abyssinia, which is an ancient civilization that Ethiopia now stands on. The blades were extremely ornate and difficult to use because of the sharp curve of the blade. Although it wasn't much use against traditional swords, the Shotel was especially useful against shields. The same curve of the blade that made it difficult to wield against swords also made it deadly against shields. The curve could reach around shields to wound combatants and it could even disarm them if it was used properly. Against mounted cavalry, the weapon was invaluable too. The scythe-like blade was used to quickly and effectively incapacitate a horse to bring the opponent to the ground with them. The most famous example of this blade being used in the modern times is in the game series Dark Souls. Number 6. Shoge Hook. This Japanese weapon is a form of Kaginawa, which is characterized by a rope or chain attached to a hook. Technically, Kaginawa is a class of grappling hooks, but this is highly dangerous and weaponized version of a grappling hook. The Shoge Hook has a ring on one end of a chain and a hook dagger combo on the other end. Much like the Meteor Hammer, this weapon is meant to be used from a distance and swung around to gain speed and lethality. The dagger on this weapon could be used to stab opponents and the hook could be used to hook into the flesh and pull your weapons, lending an evisceration ability that was extremely useful in the battle. The best modern example of this weapon being used is when it is wielded by Nogu in the Netflix Marvel series Daredevil. Number 5. Five-finger claws. This alternative weapon is not exactly practical for humans outside of science fiction and fantasy, but it is one of the most aesthetically pleasing weapons on this list. The weapon will likely never see a dip in popularity thanks to the awesome examples that some of the animal kingdom gives us for claws. Someone will always want tiger claws. You can find some pretty ornate claws through the internet, most notably Etsy, which makes this weapon a fashion statement all on its own. Our favorite example of finger claws being used is in X-Men 2, X-Men United, when Lady Deathstrike more than holds her own against Wolverine with her adamantium fingernail claws. Number 4. Haladia. If you learn to love double-edged weapons from watching Darth Maul in The Phantom Menace, then this ancient Indian weapon is for you. The halandi is a double-edged dagger that was typically used by warriors in the Indian Rajput clans during the 6th century. This blade was useful for both stabbing and slicing, and the blades of the dagger could also be serrated to inflict even more damage and make wounds from this weapon even harder to heal. The blade was big for a dagger too. Each blade was 8.5 inches and the whole weapon measured in at 23 inches long. It's also one of the earliest examples of triple-edged blades. There isn't really a modern representation of this weapon, but it definitely deserves to be showcased. Number 3. Quarterstaff. Staffs sadly don't come with magical powers, despite what most pop culture would have you believe. Quarterstaffs were hugely popular in England for quite some time, but it was at its height during the late Middle Ages and the post-classical period. It's essentially just a stick made of hardened wood that measures in at 6 to 9 feet long. Traditionally, this weapon was also tipped with some kind of metal like steel or iron to make it more effective in combat. The staff was used in stick fighting, which was big in historical European martial arts. The weapon was excellent at defense, and it was also used a lot as a thrusting weapon. It wasn't exactly made for hacking and slashing. The technique when used this is a lot like fencing with a lot of footwork and flexibility. The most famous modern example of this weapon was used in Star Wars The Force Awakens by Rey, which is one of the main characters in the movie. Number 2. Kakuti. Move aside brass knuckles, the Kakut is more awesome than you could ever be. These stealthy weapons were favored by ninjas and Kunuchi. The weapon was a ring that had 1 to 4 spikes protruding from it. Despite what it appeared to look like, these spikes weren't worn with spikes facing outward. They would actually be worn with the spikes facing inside of the palm, so they could be used as a surprise attack. The spike would pierce the opponent's flesh when they were slashed across the face or choked. The spikes were also sometimes dipped in poison to make the spikes on this ring even more deadly. Sometimes they even had a hole in them so that the warriors could thread a rope through the ring so that the rope could not be pulled away from them. There aren't a lot of modern representations of this weapon either. Number 1. Archery. This is a weapon that actually predates recorded history. It has such a long tradition. This was the most common weapon in the world until guns started to be manufactured, and you could find a history of archery in pretty much any culture in the world. The first evidence of bow use is during the Mesozoic period, where archaeologists found evidence of stone-tipped arrows in the skeletons of different animals. Archery is still popular today, but it has become an antiquated weapon in recent history. Bows are still used in hunting and the sport of archery. Being an accurate archer takes a lot of skill and practice, and it certainly isn't for everyone. It's still popular in today's culture though. Almost every fantasy or dystopian work has some kind of character that uses a bow. Our favorite example of famous bow wielders are Hawkeye and Legolas.